Right, so
Here we go.
we've got a scenario. Let's work on a scenario case basis where we have a suspicion that there is say a drug issue in one of our buildings, and we have got some pretty clear indications without having sort of good hard evidence at this stage
that talk about the dog
that there is an
situation.
that there is
right. So one of the things that you guys are doing to reduce risk in the buildings that you manage is working with the body corps to get the detector dogs through on a regular basis. You're seeing that is suppressing the drug-related activity that takes place within those buildings.
Yep.
And you've seen that?
That's right. Yeah.
Good.
Do the dogs actually, do they prone for one particular drug, or is it just general?
How do I say this? They can
meth's
do
hard
more
with the
than
smell,
one.
isn't it?
Yeah, like that. It is largely around marijuana, but apparently they can do. The dog can sniff whatever it's trained to sniff, basically.
Presumably indicates differently.
Yeah.
So depending on what the drug itself is.
Yeah.
But so again, if we think we're trying to reduce the likelihood of loss, right? So we know that meth is a massive problem. It's in the news all the time. Yeah, every day in the media, there's something bad that's happened that's meth, driven by methamphetamine. Right? So what is Active trying to do to reduce the likelihood of loss? So get the dogs through on a regular basis so it's visible. And then if issues do arise, then you're working with professional organisations who can just tidy up the process, and you've got confidence they're going to deliver high quality services that are focused on best outcomes from a client point of view.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah. Yep. And that's it. So from our point of view, if we've got a suspicion that someone's got an issue or they're dealing or whatever in their apartment, then first port of call is usually the drug dog company.
Yeah.
That will give us our first piece of evidence that we need.
Do you have to get permission to get them through? How do you work that?
No, because we're in the common property,
Common ground.
so we can basically do on behalf of the body corporate. We can arrange that without having to jump through too many hoops. So we would get that test, that first initial indication done by the dogs, and then after that, depending on what the dogs indicate, we'd get someone else in like yourselves.
Yeah.
And that would give us that real hard evidence with a report like we were talking about before. And then depending on which way it goes, like sometimes the tenant will move out or they'll stay there or what have you. And then that's when potentially we get you guys involved, Carl, to come in and decontaminate that crime scene. So crime scene or apartment or whatever it is.
It's a crime.
Well, often
it's just a crime that's being ignored, right?
Often they actually become a crime scene, with the related behaviour that around meth often moves on from, many stabbings and things, murders and different things that happen. You start from drug use.
Yeah.
Or drug manufacture.
Yeah. So as far as say that process that I just that we briefly discussed there, is that how you see the entire thing? Is that a good sort of like case study? Is that how you see it actually rolling out
For this conversation?
Yeah.
Let's just keep it focused on that, because I think there's a couple of aspects that come out of it. Is that we're all doing our bit to reduce the impact of meth, right? So I think it's a good opportunity for Active to say, well, look, we're aware of this as an issue, and you guys are. So what do you do? Right? So the first thing is highly visible. So what I'm interested to understand around is how do you communicate that through to the occupants of the units, so that the occupants are aware that that's going to go on, which increases the likelihood that their behaviour will be identified, and therefore they'll be able to be held accountable for that behaviour, which then deters them going through. So I think I'll be interested to hear what value you see for that for the buildings that you manage in terms of the suppression of meth-related behaviour and drug-related behaviour within them.
It's the recent one. We won't name buildings or anything like that, but the recent one where it was a considerable contamination, it took months and months to rectify. We have an obligation to let people know in the surrounding area, that there's been an issue. But we also don't want to be too alarmist, and we also want to make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row prior to letting people know. We don't just want to go up there and go, oh, so-and-so, there's a bloody big, huge mess issue on your floor, and they're like, oh, fucking hell.
Well,
they all freak out. They all panic.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
But, a lot of those, I'm familiar with the apartment you're talking about, but a lot of those people would probably be well aware there was something going on that wasn't correct in that actual unit or in those units, and they just let it go on, don't bring anything up.
And that was exactly it. Like,
and they need to.
Yeah, the visibly you could tell this person was fucking away with the fairies.
Amazing, she had a little child in there too.
Yeah, right. Jeez. Yeah. So, there's a few other cues that give it away before you actually get the the evidence from yourselves and that sort of thing.
But that took months to work through. I think one of the reasons that it takes months to work through is because a lot of body corps don't actually have they haven't got the policy or the processes in place that allow them to say, okay, this is going to happen. So it's kind of like this. So it's happened. Poof, then you move through it quickly, right? Because we've worked on properties which is all sorted within 3 to 4 weeks.
From start to finish.
From start to finish, and occasionally less.
Yep.
Okay, but that's because you've got a motivated owner who says, trust and confidence in what you're doing. Away you go. Everybody's kept fully informed on the way through. There's no surprises on the way through. Just information going backwards and forwards quickly, decisions made quickly, and it's on from there. But if a body corp doesn't have those procedures in place that allow them to make decisions quickly, then it can drag on and on and on and on.
And often the insurance companies do stretch it out too.
Yeah.
They take ages.
Yeah, we had to jump through a lot of hoops with the insurance companies on that one, and they'd come back and ask for the same information like 2 or 3 times.
But different ways.
Yeah, in different ways, yeah.
Something that we just did the other week, which I was going to say to you about, we did a job for a body corp. It was a unattended suicide, and when we were doing the clean-up in the property, we found meth-related gear and, glass pipe, etc. And I said to the body corp manager, you should get that place tested for meth, because I guarantee you it would have meth in there. Not interested.
Really? Bloody hell.
So now the consequences of that behaviour and the harm that's associated with it have been perpetuated.
Yeah.
Because your $300, is it an issue?
Well, yes or no, isn't it?
Absolutely. So you know whether or not you need to do something. But no, we don't want to spend that because we don't want to have to deal with it, because it's all a bit hard. And the government said.
But they're going to have to deal with that somewhere along the line.
Somebody at some stage will. Right?
I would have done with it all at once.
That's a bloody tough call, because you're hoping that body corp manager is just passing on what the owners have agreed to, which is still a piss poor decision, and hopefully it wasn't them sort of shielding that situation from the owners, because we've seen situations before where a body corp manager they won't actually let the committee know what's going on, and they'll just sort of hold that information to themselves. It's not their bloody information to hold for a start.
The other thing, Brady, we still see, Miles, and you'll agree with this, with some, not all, with some property managers, body corp managers, there's still a certain amount of ignorance to do with meth. They think it's a fairy tale still. Some,
yeah, no, definitely. There's.
I mean, it's getting better. It's that whole education and knowing, what it is and why, what happens. But some people still want to bury their heads in the sand with it.
And I think a significant part of that comes down to organisational philosophy, right? And what is the willingness to engage with risk in a particular office environment, right? Because it could be the same brand, but a different office has got a fundamentally different approach from the one just down the road. And it's kind of like these guys are really focused on what are the needs of the property owner. How do I make sure that the asset is as effectively protected as it can be? And in this end, it's all about branch profitability. I won't get engaged with that because it's all a little bit too hard, takes up too much time. I don't get paid any extra money for it. So that even at some of it's ignorance. There's new people who come through, don't know, and a lot of people it's just willful ignorance, and they just want to ignore it. And in this political environment, they've been given permission to ignore it.
Yeah, it's a shame when that sort of thing comes down to a commercial decision.
You've got to remember, Brady, is when we, meth went from being 0.5 as an acceptable limit, remember?
Yeah.
To 1.5, and then there's this discrepancy over the Gluckman report now, isn't there?
Sure.
Which says 15 in some areas. So when you look at America, the highest limit in America in the 52 states is 0.5. And some of the states have 0.1.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, they consider it a lot more serious.
Yeah,
Than
I think there's one or
New
two
Zealand.
states that have bumped it up a little bit.
Maybe.
Like Colorado and California, they sort of sit there at the 1.5, and then Utah's got a law that says it's 1. But that affects it in many, many different ways over there. But I think the point is well made, right? Is that we are an absolute outlier in here in terms of proposing regulation at 15, and on the basis of a lack of evidence, which is again is just sort of fundamentally wrong. But what it creates is this perception that we don't have to worry about it, and there's lots of different reasons why people don't want to have to bother with it. The problem with that is that it then bounces the problem and kicks the problem down the road. And significantly, I think it sends a message to the community out there, which is, in my opinion, a growing community of people who think that methamphetamine's a good lifestyle choice. That I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to do things now to limit the impact of my behaviour on the property and then on the environment, and we just get this bigger ripple effect from those choices that go on.
You're talking about the states there. Do those figures like correlate to the states that have legalised marijuana? Is it like a?
Oh, I think it's so to a point. Yeah, I mean, both California, for example, use of methamphetamine is a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
Both California, Colorado have got
The high levels.
And legalisation of marijuana within them, and I think there's this sort of shift in drug policy that's taking place and again it would be part of the harm reduction philosophy, which is just a whole other debate and quite an interesting one to get into. But if you can depower the criminal element that sits within it, then you're going to reduce harm. You've still got the drugs that are being pushed out through the system, and the effect of those drugs doesn't matter whether they're legal or illegal. The effect is on people is still the same, and the effect on behaviour is still the same.
I think it's just more too. There's more and more every year, isn't there? Like there's more coming into New Zealand now than ever before. Look at some of the big drug busts in New Zealand now. They're larger than ever recorded.
100%. Not necessarily 100% larger, but certainly are.
Yeah, they're huge.
I absolutely agree with you, Carl, that they are that much bigger. And yet, where I struggle a little bit in terms of this perception of risk is that the wastewater analysis that has been done by ESR, that doesn't suggest a significant change in the amount that's being used. But there's a truckload more that's being intercepted. Right? So what are the reasons that people are taking all of these risks to import this product into the country, and then they're stockpiling it? It doesn't seem to make a whole heck of a lot of sense, but again, maybe they are. You look at the drug harm index that's out there, so this is when you do the analysis of the harm that's associated with it. And a lot of the people in jail for stealing shit are in jail because they're stealing stuff to feed their meth habits. And so the relationship between what I describe as acquisitive harm, so theft, and methamphetamine, it sits there at a fraction of the cost of the methamphetamine, which suggests that most methamphetamines paid for out of sort of post-tax income.
No,
it doesn't make sense.
And as I was saying to you before, Brady, a lot of the other work that we do, because meth's only about 25% of the work we do, a lot of the other assaults, stabbings, murders are often meth fueled. People irate, violence, and so it just goes on and on and on. So it's not actually the meth; it's the going forward from there, how it affects, and it just unfolds, affects everything, doesn't it? The landlord that owns the property, the kids that live in the property with the, with mum and dad, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah. But politicians fiddling around with numbers and measurements isn't going to solve it, is it?
Well, it's not actually out there in the.
So it depends on what you measure as success is, right? So if you measure as success is reducing the costs that are associated with managing, let's say, meth contamination, right? So, go back 6 years now, and Kaingaroa is spending $50 million a year on refurbing meth contaminated properties. Testing, getting on for a couple of thousand houses. Now they test 200 a year and they spend a fraction of that. Right, so as far as that measure of success is concerned, great.
Yeah.
Problems
the meth will
solved.
still be in those houses.
Yeah.
They choose not to
Yeah.
So we've solved the problem. No, you haven't.
Yeah.
All you've done is given permission for people to engage in the behaviour, and then that perpetuates the cycle of engagement, which means that the problem gets bigger. And I think I've used this analogy before, right? It's a bit like if you've got a boil, you stick a plaster on top of it, she's gone away, right? But it hasn't. And unless you bloody stick the old knife in, drain it out and clean it out, and there's pain and discomfort that's associated with that, it's just going to get worse.
Well, we know we won't come for miles if we've got a boil.
Doctor.
Depends on where it is.
Yeah, I'll stay away from you guys.
So if we go back to the scenario before, so let's say we've got the positive indication from yourselves, then we get in touch with you guys to come in and do a decontamination, a cleanup. At what point, like, do you guys start communicating with each other, or is it basically done through, you know, people like ourselves? Is it
often, if we get a report from Miles, I mean, I've said to you, I think, you know, Meth Solutions, CPI and Z do one of the best reports in the market. They're very easy to read. If you're not even in the building industry, you can understand one very easily. And often I'll ring Miles if I've got a question about the property, but usually his reports are that good that I can go ahead and quote it from what he supplies, if it's a full report. And that's what we're talking about with people not wanting to have the full reports to do a yes, no, cheaper answer.
So just explain the full report then, as opposed to different types of reports.
So if you think about our process, right? We've got an indication from the dogs. We think there might be an issue, right? So the first stage isn't to go and spend $2,500 on doing a full detailed site investigation that creates the full report that Carl is referring to. The first stage is to do a screening assessment, which is a significantly lower cost, because what we know from the drug dog side of things is that it's not a perfect system. It's a really, really good system for increasing awareness of, hey, you know, meth using community that may or may not be in this building. This is how we're managing it. So what we want you lot is to bugger off somewhere else where they don't do these things, because if you do, you're more likely to come here, you're more likely to be found. So we do this lower cost screening assessment. So stage one of that, you might be looking at $350, as in hundreds.
Yep.
And then if there's an issue, depending on how those samples are taken, you can break out individual test results. So the issue there is it is still a screening assessment. So to keep those costs down, you're minimising the amount of information that you are collecting, and you're limiting the number of samples that you take. So again, the framework of reference here is the New Zealand standard. And if you're doing a screening assessment, you just get one sample out of each room, and the areas which are most likely to be contaminated. Okay. Now, what the standards then says about a detailed site investigation, which is the full report that Carl's referring to, is multiple samples per use area based on the physical size of the room. So like this room that we're in, probably just over 20 square metres, so under the New Zealand standard you get 3 samples. And what then we do with our sampling is to look for spatial distribution of the high risk surfaces and then the high risk entities. So for example, we've got our ducting in here.
Anywhere there's airflow.
High risk is but an acceleration of airflow through that side of things, so high risk there, high risk in the doorways, windows on the opposite side of the room. So what does that mean then as a detailed site investigation? So screening assessment of, we know there's some meth in this room, but there can be a profound difference between one side of the room and the other, and it's more likely to have a difference if you've got a bigger room. When people have got the results of individual testing though, which is this sort of lab composite approach to a screening assessment, often what they feel is that, we've got enough information. We know that there's meth in that room, we have to do some decontamination work. We know that there isn't meth in this room, so we don't have to worry about doing any decontamination work. But for the decontamination contractor, you're really light on information. And one of the really big advances in the meth risk management industry is that the decontamination contractors will back their knowledge, skills and abilities to get it under the levels in the New Zealand standard for a fixed rate. But the less information these guys have, the more risk.
The harder it is to get it across the line.
The harder it is to get it across the line, right?
Yeah. And we guarantee our work, so we've got to make sure we're getting it right.
Yeah, because I mean, like, all the different sort of scenes that you guys go to decontaminate, a meth scene would look vastly different to, say, a bloody murder or a
I would
or a
say
hoarder or
meth's
something
like an
that.
imaginary bucket of paint. If you went into a room and threw the bucket of paint, it's going to be higher in some areas and lower in other areas. And as Miles and I have always discussed, like anywhere where there's levels of airflow, it's going to be higher. Door frames, window frames, ducting, and also people's meth use, where they're actually using it. And as I said earlier to you, Brady, often they're doing it in secret, so they go off to a little area, a laundry or something to one side of the room, try and puff out the window wherever.
Toilets, laundries, bathrooms,
cars,
walk-in wardrobes,
extractor fans.
So we just don't do houses, so we do buildings. Look, one we were talking about earlier, that's a very sad situation. We do caravans, cars, mobile caravans. We've just done 3 trucks for a large trucking company. Those trucks drive backwards and forwards from Christchurch to Auckland, and it's good to know that those drivers are hard out on the class barbecue.
Jeez, keeps them awake, Keeps them awake on those long,
long
trips.
You might be driving the other way.
Fucking hell.
And I don't think New Zealand understands how much meth use is out there. And it's not one particular age bracket. It's all.
But I think so the good thing is that you've got experienced industry players who are able to do more at lower cost than was historically the case, who are guaranteed to do it, so it stops this sort of money go round that can be associated. We've done the cleaning, we didn't quite pass, now you need to pay us to do more cleaning. So that was a feature.
We don't do that.
Back in 2000, but it's probably more like 2010.
About 50% of companies would charge to go back.
Right, so
we've never done that.
It's when you think about harm, it's obviously the health and safety is the main driver of aspects of this, but then what you're also trying to reduce is the economic cost and then the emotional harm, right? So somebody's been taken advantage of. So take the owners of a unit within a building. They tend to be a bit upset that this has happened to them, and now what they're focusing on is how can I hold on to my precious dollars, and often it's one of those sorts of situations where you spend a little bit more to get a lot more information. Then what that allows the professionals like Cal to do is be more successful.
We try to encourage them to do it right. I had one a few weeks ago, Miles. They had a report from you guys. It was in his one rental property. He was an older gentleman, and the report, I think it had levels 48 or something around that in the property. And I talked to him about going back, doing some more testing. Well, he needs to know how much it's going to cost to the house. I said, well, it depends where it's concentrated to. And he actually got quite hostile with me. And I actually rang him back and I said, hey, look, don't shoot me. I'm actually trying to help you. I'm trying to save you money. Go back and get more testing done. And you might find that it's just limited to one area, which was going to be a lot easier for us to quote and do. But it becomes our fault. And it's not our fault. We're trying to help solve a problem.
But again, I think that's part of the narrative that's been run out there, right? Is the people like Cal and myself, we're just simply trying to rip people off, and that isn't the case. What we're trying to do is to use our knowledge, skills, abilities, and experience in the framework of reference established by the New Zealand Standard, which is it's an end-to-end process that when you follow it, typically people get through it more quickly, and their overall costs is lower.
We also have rental properties, as you know. So we've had meth in our own properties, and a couple of times I've kicked myself severely because I've seen things that their whole behaviour changed, and when I should jump on it, and I've just let it go because you think, I'll deal with it later, which is what we were talking about earlier. You just got to keep on it, get the right results.
Yeah. Is there ever say you do one of these tests? Is there ever a time where you go, you can't actually clean that, the number's too high, or do you guys ever sort of have a chat about the results and go, fuck, that's really high, or
that's what we were talking about earlier before we sat down to the podcast. The highest we've done was 2,800, which we did the test. We were actually the third decontamination company to do that property. We actually quoted it at the same time as the other two, but we were more expensive. They came back to me and said, will we negotiate on a price? I said, no, it's a lot of work and a lot of responsibility with that property. And 3 months later, we were in there doing the property, and the manager of the property said to me, this has actually cost us more than what you originally quoted. But that was hard work.
Oh, not only was it hard work, but I mean that was one of the unusual situations where the meth contamination had penetrated through the jib lining and into the firewall jib.
Wow.
We had to test the properties next door, remember?
Yeah, and one of the very, very few instances where, because it's all non-structural, the jib was coming off and being taken out. But when you're 7 floors up and you've got contaminated material, that's all going down the stairs, wrapped up in bags, so it becomes bloody expensive to sort it through. I think where we're at now, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Carl, right, is with a lot of the decontamination processes, because that was, what, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, probably more than that.
Yeah, so with the skills that the decon companies have got, the likelihood of getting to that physical removal of like the
very
walls
rarely
themselves is very, very rare indeed.
Okay.
You might be scraping off paint because the meth accumulates in that, or the poly will accumulate in that.
With enamel paint in
scrape that
particular.
off, yeah. And then get back to the timber, but the basic structure itself will.
So we didn't, with that property, we didn't take out any of the framing, but you actually tested the framing, and even the framing was above.
Yeah,
and then we had to go and test the apartments next door. It was a very challenging property, but we would very rarely take a piece of jib off now. The only time we would ever take a piece of jib off if there was structural damage to it, where it's been exposed. So we'd cut it then, but that's the only time now.
There's been more than one apartment where there's an awful lot of meth and an awful lot of structural damage in there as well. I mean, again, structural damage is an indicator of risk, right? And so, because the perceptions around methamphetamine contamination, the risks that are associated with, have been suppressed, because there's a lack of awareness on the part of some people within that property management real estate space to engage, because there's some people who actively turn a blind eye to it. One of the big things that we can see will go wrong is that people ignore the indicators of risk. They get the paintbrush out, and then it's like, well, I better get you guys in to do a meth test, because in people's own minds, what they're doing is they're fixing the problem. Actually, what they're doing is making the problem worse.
Far worse.
Just kicking it down the road.
More than that, right? Because what you do is you go from being able to clean it off the surface to now putting it between two surfaces.
Yeah.
Right?
And the meth will leach.
Yeah.
It will leach through paint. So sometimes you can clean it. And the worst thing, Miles, as we've discussed before, is when someone hasn't disclosed they've actually done decoration in there, and we go in there and we're trying to decon the property, and the levels actually go up because it's leaching through the paint.
Getting drawn back through the paint, assuming that they did a reasonable job of surface preparation, and the paint stuck to the surface, because the other one can be that it all just sloughs off. And then everybody's unhappy because people have now spent thousands of dollars fixing the issue with a coat of paint,
and I think that's
where just made it more expensive.
We were talking earlier. People try to take shortcuts with it. There is no shortcut. There's a correct way and a wrong way, and if you follow the system and the process, you'll get the result you need at the end to have your property back in a condition you can either sell or rent out again in a safe condition. And that's what it's about. If you're trying to take shortcuts with it all the time, it's going to backfire, it's going to backfire, it's going to backfire.
And it may not backfire on the person who owns the property at that particular point in time, because they might get away with it. Again, you think about the whole real estate sales transaction. Again, it's sort of, it seems to be coming back a little bit, whether that's because there's some news in the media about meth, and people are thinking, actually, well, that meth properties would maybe tick that toxicology box clause. Maybe it's because it's more of a buyer's market than a seller's market, and therefore buyers are able to put a few more conditions in, and therefore get that toxicology clause box ticked. But too often, that sale and purchase process is capable of being managed in such a way that you exclude getting a meth test done on a property that there's an issue, or there's likely to be an issue. And so when that happens, now the problem is on the new owner. Okay, and that new owner doesn't have recourse to insurance. They're paying for everything out of post-tax income, and that new owner is more likely to be a first-home buyer, because they're the people who are buying the ex-rentals, where most of the meth, well, not most, but an awful lot of the meth-related behaviour is going on. Certainly, where they're finding the majority of the meth labs.
And if you've got a young family moving into that, last thing you want.
And so it's kicking down the road. It's passing past the parcel that's on fire and full of real nasty stuff, and I don't want to be the one who's holding it. Just shuffle it on down the road. So this whole sort of sense of, there was an organisation that had branding the same colour as my shirt, that was talking about being kind.
What colour was that? Vase?
And
brought that up earlier.
kindness was the mantra. And yet it's adopted a policy and approach that sees this land with people who are least able to deal with the issues.
They don't want to solve the problem though. It gives them another reason to bloody get their beak into our lives, or not our lives in particular,
Well,
but society.
But it's not the problem's not going away, Brady. It's actually getting worse. Like we get more and more work all the time. It just keeps coming in. And as I said earlier, meth's not the only part of the crime scene cleaning we do, the meth cleanup, but it's a big part, and it's there all the time.
It feeds into some of the other aspects that you do,
right? It goes into most of them.
Have you ever had a case where you've had a combination of a meth house or whatever and a murder? Like, have you ever had the full combo? Yeah. And what the fuck do you do in that situation? Because that would seem to be like just hell on earth to have to deal with. How do you bloody deal with that? I mean, that's two of the worst bloody things in the world.
Similar system and process. We just use different chemicals with different parts of it, but we work through it.
Yeah.
Clean up the mess before you start cleaning up the meth.
Yeah. So there's the cleanup, and then there's the decontamination, and they're two.
Decontamination is separate.
Yeah. So they're two totally separate things. Yeah.
Albeit, if you do the cleaning part of it well, you increase the likelihood of success for the decontamination.
Yeah,
side
definitely.
Of things, right?
It's about being thorough. You've just got to work through it. And we talked about that imaginary bucket of paint when you go in and throw it. You've just got to make sure that every square inch is done in the place. You can't go in and just do the 10 centimetre squares that Miles has done testing. Oh, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Because people think we just go in with a garden sprayer and spray a bit of stuff around and walk out. Nothing like that. Actually, when we first started in business, we offered a system, and I still will, where people can do their own contamination, and I'll consult them and they'll work through on a process with it. And I had one guy that did a place in Christchurch, and he's a ex-builder, got a couple of rental properties, really hard worker, and he did a really good job. He followed every step, every process, every chemical did. Place passed first time. I actually said, hey, you're really, really good. Do you want to get involved in the business? Or do you want to start doing it? He said, never again. Is that hard work? He said, not for me. Yeah. It is hard work, and people don't think that.
Oh, we see what you guys do. Jesus Christ, let's
Well, I probably don't do much of it now, Brady, but I have done. I've done every part of every job we do, so I'm not saying I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you got to understand it.
Yeah, now I like the eating part.
I think a big part of it, right, is that, again, what you've got is if somebody owns a property that has been contaminated by methamphetamine, right, they're in a significantly heightened emotional state, right? They're looking at hemorrhaging cash, they've been taken advantage of, there's a whole bunch of things that are working against them. They're in an environment now where they've got, what should be a trusted source of advice saying you can't trust these people that you're
they haven't
working
slept
with.
for 30 days.
But you then got this sort of scenario where you've got a framework of reference, the New Zealand standard, really good process to take people through. You've got responsible professional operators who will follow that standard through. Then you've got an increasing number of people who look at the money that's available for doing this work, right? So not the cost of doing it properly, but the headline. Who will often then be telling people who might be strapped financially what they want to hear as opposed to what they need to hear. And we're dealing with a sort of situation at the moment where that's been happening for a property owner. They don't have recourse to insurance, so obviously every dollar's precious. They're trying to work out how they can squeeze that cost down, and you've got somebody who's essentially giving them the message, which when I'm listening to what's being said, that they're going to be spot cleaning here. All they're going to do is think, okay, where are these guys going to test? Let's get it to pass the test.
You know how many of those we could do in a week?
Yeah, but it's about passing the test is the motion, is the motivation behind what they're doing, as opposed to creating that certificate of clearance, which says the process has been followed, it's really thorough, you can have confidence that these test results in these areas are a reflection of what happens everywhere else, which is why we as an organisation, we've got a very few decon companies that we are comfortable providing their contact details over to a building owner, and crime scene cleaners have been one of those for many years now, because you can have confidence that they're not going to try and fudge the process and and then everybody.
The other thing, Brady, is when we've done a decontamination of property, and Miles, this company, has go back into to do the post testing. We don't know where they're going to test, because they'll test in different areas than when they did the first testing. So that we have to be thorough. We can't. Oh, well, he didn't test there, we won't do that. So every square inch needs to be done.
But I think you can also, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Carol, what we're always aiming to do is to saying what's most likely to be contaminated based on the observations of the layout of the property in the first instance, and then the observations of the work that has been done, so that you can have confidence going into that first round of decon that we've got it pretty much nailed in terms of what the top end looks like. Because if you know where the top end is, you can work back from there. If you've got testing that doesn't tell you what the top end is, the difference between a test result and the top end can be a multiplier of 10, 20 times. Right?
It's that whole learning curve. We've come a long way from where we all started to where we are now, and that reflects in the cost of actually doing the job. We've become more refined, we've become quicker, we use less product, just got better at doing it.
One thing I've forgotten to touch on, given the fact that it's an illegal habit, is the police. Like, at what point do you guys ever deal directly with the police, or are they sort of dealing with people like ourselves through to you guys? Do you ever deal with the cops on this sort of thing?
Very occasionally.
Yeah, very occasionally. They've usually, the place has been raided or busted or whatever, and they've done their investigation. It's been handed back.
Honestly, Carl, I'd say more often than not, the police have never had any involvement with the property at all.
Yeah.
And if they have, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with properties that have had no police involvement within them.
The council still does some of them on the.
Only if the police get involved. All right. So that whole getting on the limb report is directly related to either somebody providing council with a copy of a meth test report, so a disaffected buyer is often how that route happens, or a disaffected tenant. We've seen that happen. But usually it's the police who will provide something through because they believe there's a hazard. But that can take weeks to come through. Right? So we've had a situation recently where an owner was getting signals that it won't be that bad. Within 7 days of starting a conversation with us, we've had an initial conversation. He's gone away and had a bit of a think about it. He's done the basic upfront testing. He knows he's got a major issue as far as his property is concerned. 2.5 months later, the police recontacted us. We've got the results of that testing back now. I'm afraid so we're going to have to advise the council. And what we've been trying to work with this person to say is this is likely to happen, which obviously you don't want to happen, but you've got to presume and assume that it will do.
That's hard.
There's even more that you find.
Someone like that, their property gets listed and others don't.
Look, it is what it is, though, Carl. Right? I mean, again,
so how many do you reckon? How many houses in New Zealand have been infected by meth?
So again, it's like affected to the point where you should do some decon in relation to the NZ standard.
Correct.
Right, I'd say you're probably looking at between 7 and 10% of all houses.
Yeah, I thought 10%.
Jesus, that's a lot.
That's houses. We're not talking warehouses.
Yeah.
Camper vans, caravans.
Oh, but so you take, for example, what? It's an outrageous statement. How can you make that sort of thing? So let's take the emergency housing situation, where there's a lot of people through COVID were provided with shelter, going into motel and hotel accommodation. You would expect meth to be in every room in one of those properties where that has happened. And then through, it's not limited to any particular socioeconomic group, but there's more of a greater representation in people who are hard up against it. And the percentages in there are going to be much, much higher than through sort of a general population. But 40% of all the properties that we've tested over the last more than 10 years have had a bit of meth in. Now, not all of those need to have any decon work done. And again, you put your number up to 15, which is what the government's proposing, then you're shifting it up a bit. Well, what does that mean? If you're doing nothing to reduce the meth-related behaviour that occurs, just means it's going to take longer to get there. So you're deferring the issue. Now, the problem with that is that at the same time as you're allowing the meth contamination to accumulate, past the point that other jurisdictions of the world say is unacceptable, you're ignoring the behaviour. What does that mean? Well, now the habits are getting worse. How are you going to fund your growing meth habit? You're going to steal more stuff. You're going to engage in more antisocial behaviour. And should we be surprised that we are where we are? And when you come to your government number of 15, we're 4 times more likely to have an issue today than we were 5 years ago.
I was driving around Auckland the other day, and there was one street that I was in, and I thought, we've done 3 houses in the street. So it's not like we go to the street, we've done a house here. There was 3 houses, we've done that one.
Yeah, but you would drive around the country, and I bet there's not a town between here and bloody Christchurch that you haven't done.
We've done them all.
Yeah.
Out in the what?
Yeah.
But again, as a society, what do we want to do about that?
Yeah.
So at the moment, what do we want to do about that? Well, landlords don't want to spend any money they don't feel they have to. The government said you don't have to spend money on meth testing, so they're not.
But that's gonna unfold, and someone's gonna bring in a harder structure to follow, and next thing, all these houses are gonna need sorting again.
Again, the basis of the shift the number conversation is on the
That's making the problem go away, isn't it?
Well, it's
that bandage over the boil thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. We don't believe there's an issue, and therefore, because we don't believe there's an issue, we've got no evidence that there's an issue, we'll make it go away. But you can have submissions to government from social housing providers who are saying, look, our people who are working and going in and out of these properties are reporting adverse health responses going in and out of the properties. And then subsequently they're testing positive for meth contamination at levels which are way lower than your 15. There must be something in there. Well, what we're saying is do the research. Don't change your numbers until you've done the research, because once you've changed the numbers, now we've got investment in the change.
But we're not looking at the research that's been done overseas.
So to be fair, it's been looked at, but then it's been discounted.
Because other countries have spent a lot of time, money and effort researching, and we look at it and don't do anything with it. Well, the information's all there, isn't it?
So I think there's enough information there to say, hey, look, we should look deeper into this. But that's what people are doing.
Yeah.
They don't want to look.
I thought you had a
deeper
hit
into
miles.
They don't want to look deeper into it, right? Because if we find there's a problem, then we've got to do something about it. Whereas at the moment, we've got this plausible deniability space that we can operate in. And the problem with that is, again, you're perpetuating the problem. You're enabling the behaviour. What does that mean? It means more wasted lives, sort of literally gone up in smoke. But in order to feed that habit, there's all sorts of other stuff that has to happen that then has a bigger impact on the wider.
I just don't think New Zealand, as a country, we're embracing what a problem it is and how much we're spending on it. Not only the people that are using it, but I was told about a guy in Christchurch that was spending 10 grand a week on meth. That's a big habit.
10 grand a week.
Not too many jobs.
$500,000 a year.
Yeah, that guy's in his 50s. He's now clean from it all, but was spending 10 grand a week.
I know I've heard of people who spend more than that, right? So,
but where's the money come from? At the cost of everything else.
100%.
Shit. That guy's, just crazy.
But even if you stripped it right down to the basic investor level, okay, and it's even more significant when you've got a situation where the income from a property is a person is dependent on the income for their sort of lifestyle,
pay the mortgage,
well-being, right? So a lot of mum and dad investors, this is their retirement fund that's associated with it, right? So it's really, really important that the integrity of that asset is maintained. So what should you be doing? In my opinion, right, you reduce the likelihood that you're going to have the loss occurring. So you test, you communicate through to people, you're trying to stay away from me, don't come and rent this house, we'll find out what's going on. So what are the government effectively doing by bumping up this number? It's kind of like, well, we're not going to hold people accountable unless they've gone past this number that we've decided denotes damage at the tenancy tribunal level. What does that mean to a meth head?
They don't care. They don't actually usually turn up to the tribunal hearings.
No.
So I think what happens is your investor's the one that carries it at the end of the day.
Too often
their interest rates are higher. It's their long-term investment. It's being damaged. The tenants stop paying rent. Then they've got to fix it.
But it's only damaged.
And their recourse on it.
It's only damaged if you get a meth test done.
Yeah.
Because then you can't see it. The fact that people might get crook within it, and not everybody does, but some people do.
Some people get very sick.
That's we don't worry about that side of things. We'll pretend it ain't happening. We'll ignore it, and it'll all go away.
Oh, so you remember that lawyer that was in Tautadu Point years ago, had bought that old villa and done it up?
Yep.
I can't remember the lady's name, but I wouldn't say it anyway because the Privacy Commission, but the Privacy Act. But she and her husband bought this old villa, did it up, and
was the next house in New Zealand property.
Had a child in the property.
Yep.
The child developed asthma and breathing difficulties. The husband developed something else, some skin disorder or something.
Yeah, there was skin
and breathing
issues.
They were fit. They got the house tested for meth. There was meth in it. Got it decommed.
Highest level was just over 4.
That's right. Had it fixed, and health conditions improved immediately.
There you go.
Yeah.
Proves that it works.
You remember that, don't you?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I'll go again. Yes, I do remember that. And the problem that we've got, I think, is that people have been persuaded by government policy messaging to try and take it off the list off the checklist. And I have a problem with that because it fundamentally puts the dollars and cents ahead of people's well-being. And I know that it sounds a bit self-serving, but the cost of ruling it in or out is very low. And the cost of managing it on an ongoing basis, all tax deductible still for the time being, very low.
Next year,
and so if you can prevent it from happening in the first place, that's absolutely the best possible outcome. But again, that's not.
So manage your property properly as you manage your portfolio. Test in between tenants. Make sure you're choosing the right tenants, and then when you have a problem, make sure you do proper testing, proper decom, guaranteed work, certificate at the end of it.
Yeah.
And that's how you reduce the harm.
Yeah. Okay, and that leads into, I guess, the third part of that discussion around, we've talked about the decontamination, the testing. Now talk about the coatings. So you guys have both had experience with various types of coatings that can make decontamination easier. And talk to us about that.
Yeah, so this is go back to that risk equation, right? So likelihood of loss, consequences of loss. And so we've invested a huge amount of time, energy and effort in trying to reduce the likelihood that people end up with the problem. So reducing the likelihood that they pay for our high cost services, that they have to get Carl and his team in to decontaminate the property. And now that takes place in an environment where the government said, don't worry about it. So what does that mean? Well, that means that regardless of the reference level that people work to, you're more likely to end up with a problem. And there are some particular sectors of the housing market where it's an absolute shoo-in. And look, candidly, multi-unit dwellings, it's going to happen at some stage. You can't pick which one it is. And so one of the things that we started doing years ago was engaging with coating manufacturers, so paint, and saying, well, surely you guys have got some products that you could use in that sort of an environment. They're going to be more expensive than a standard paint from Dulux or Resines, but surely there's something that you've got that's going to be easy to clean, and that's where we appear to be getting to. So it's still a bit of an evolution, and it's not the sort of thing that every homeowner would go out and invest in. But if you've got a situation where you've got like high wear and tear just through generally living, so you take common areas, for example, of buildings with lots and lots of foot traffic that are going on with them, the bumps and the bangs and so on and so forth that happen with that. If you've got a multi-unit dwellings where you've got a meth event that takes place in one of the units, all of that can come out and get into the common areas, which then becomes a real nightmare to try and manage for the individual unit itself. If you know that you're in a high risk sector, one of the things that you can do is just keep going through the cycle of, I've got a problem, lots of money on the detailed testing, lots of money on the decon, validation testing, versus can you then truncate that and reduce the costs that's associated with the decontamination.
I think most when we first looked at those products long time ago was when we were looking at polyurethane in particular in some surfaces that were very hard to decontaminate, and we were looking at products that we could use to coat them, because we'd clean them and the levels would go up because it's leaching through, and that's when we first started looking at
having the conversation to try and find out what a solution to that might look like, because you've got structural elements. So there's some famous New Zealand housing brands that are structural and got an awful lot of varnish, polyurethane.
We hate many of those, don't we, Miles?
I think it's not a decontamination company in the country that hasn't been owned by one of those.
Where was my one in Eden Terrace?
Doesn't really matter. It wasn't too far away from you, that's for sure. But that's just the nature of that particular surface coating. So you change the surface coating and you go from being incredibly hard to decontaminate to easy, whilst maintaining the look of the and the finish that you're looking for, and so it's just thinking about things a little bit differently. It's about saying, okay, well, we get benefits around the meth space, but if you've got the right coating, then you'll get benefits around, let's say, mold. Right? So mold won't be able to penetrate through these coatings because they're super hard. Therefore, they've got longer lifespans, so your recoat period comes down. So they're more expensive in the right set of circumstances, and like I say, it won't be for everybody. In the right set of circumstances, it makes sense to invest in that up front because your operational costs are going to come down,
especially in those very high use areas.
For sure.
Yeah. So the actual product itself, what does it look like? Is it clear, or is it like a real sort of runny liquid, or what is it?
So it is it's a two-pot mix, and its finish is a high quality paint finish if it's pigmented, but you can get the clear coat products as well. So it's the sort of thing that you can put it over. If people want to maintain a timber finish look, then they can do that. If they want to have a pigmented finish, they can do that. It's not one of those products where you've got the full colour range, but a lot of the property types that we're talking about, where you've got this high risk exposure, you don't need the full colour range. You need just a basic range that that you can get in and get sorted.
And how do you actually apply it? Is it the same as, do you just roll it on, or how do you actually get it on the walls?
Yeah, you do, but as opposed to I don't know, maybe having a basic respirator on its full face gears, because and the protection that you have to.
Can you spray it on?
Personal protection. You can spray it on, but then your coverage rate isn't quite as good as if you brush and roll. So you can make gains on the labour side of things, but then your product cost can go up. There's quite a lot of because the two-pot mix, the odour that's associated with it is something that needs to be managed. So that then creates some limitations around where you can use the product itself. So as I say, it's not the it's not the answer for everything, but it certainly can make a big difference in those property types where candidly you shift from being it might be an issue, I should be okay, to it's going to happen at some stage, whether it's this year or the next year or the year after that. And then when it does happen, what's the cost that's associated with trying to clean those things up? A lot of the organisations that are operating in that space are not for profit, and therefore every dollar that they have operational spend is absolutely precious. So if you can spread that further, then those organisations can do more. A lot of those organisations do provide support to people who've got meth use habits, but if we're chewing through that money on the decontamination and testing side of things, then there isn't as much available.
Does it have to be applied on a contained space? Like, can you apply it outside?
Yeah, absolutely can. Yeah, so, and one of the things that's been looked at by
commercial
the
buildings
organisation that we're working alongside as far as this is concerned is using it in the modular housing side of things. So it all goes in pre-painted, and then up she goes, and you're on from there. And again, if you can get this onto structural items, then it makes it that much easier to maintain.
Were you sort of coming at it from maybe a graffiti point of view?
Yeah, definitely. You know, the graffiti is a big issue for some of our clients, and if it could be applied there and you can just wash it off, would save a lot of work, wouldn't it?
Well, because how would these coatings actually affect your guys' work and make it a heck of a lot easier, wouldn't it?
We're still going to have lots of work on them, and we're already in the interim, and I'm very well aware of the product Miles talking about. It's in a very early stage. We're already using a coating for some polyurethane that we've had developed along with a paint supplier, and that works. The nano coating is going to be, a lot better.
There'll be parts of the market where it makes sense for it to do, and the benefits.
And some of those are not even. I mean, I can see advantages for that nano coating in areas that are nothing to do with meth at all.
Correct. And the reality is that much of it would never have it. So if a meth event occurred, then you'd be able to resolve that more readily. But you're more likely to have a mold event, or you're more likely to have, the high wear. Right? So again, think about the buildings that you look after, and people want to maintain them to a high standard. So the scuff marks in hallways where people have dragged cases down there and all that sort of that bloody black mark that you've got to get the jiff and the scouring pad out and you're scrubbing away. So if you can take it from that, 5 minutes to resolve a relatively minor thing, to squirt a citrus cleaner and off she comes, then operationally it saves time, money, hassle, and if you recoat, your period goes out from sort of 5 to 7 years to 7 to 15 or longer.
Cost effective.
Then
that's where
it's worth paying
polyurethane.
That extra up front.
That's where polyurethane for many years had been a great product, because it is a lot harder wearing than paint.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just that
so on a
meth
rental
loves it.
property or a commercial property, it's just meth is not great with it. Absorbs it.
I'm no scientist, obviously, but is it all about the meth particles can penetrate the polyurethane particles, so therefore it keeps leaching out?
So I'm no scientist either, to be fair.
I thought you were a scientist, Miles.
Oh, no.
You were telling me about the boil before.
You can't see that propeller going on. But no, I had a conversation with the guys who manufacture the product, and there's a chemical bond that sets up between the polyurethane and the methamphetamine. So it literally does stick like the proverbial
It's horrible.
To a blanket.
Whenever we get a report through that's got lots of poly, and everyone goes, and we all have a little joke. We've all got our nemesis as far as a property that's been issues for us, and mine's not very far away from here, but we got there with it.
You did?
But,
You absolutely did. But it again,
if that had been nano coating on it,
it would have been easy.
Would have been easy.
Absolutely easy. And this again is where let's take social housing providers. So they're often working with third-party owned property, and it's that understanding that not every property is created equal. So you might get this 4-bedroom home in this part of town. Oh, fantastic, but it's got polyurethane beams. It's got some asbestos.
I walk around those houses when I look at them and I go,
So now what you've got is this entity which is focused on provision of shelter to people who are at risk, and that's what their main focus is. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, with us, think about the risk. That's the sort of property which then the liability that can sit with the not-for-profit organisation that takes responsibility for it can be tens of thousands of dollars, because you get a major meth event, what have you got to do with the asbestos, right? That's got to come off as
We've
well.
got
So
one right now. The people have tested it, built in the 70s. It's got stippled ceilings.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
So I said, have you tested for asbestos? No. So they've gone back and now tested, and yes, they're asbestos. So that problem of meth has now just got larger with the asbestos being involved, because that asbestos needs to come off. We can't clean it. If you put anything on it, it'll just fall apart.
So that's how, again, the shame of suppressing awareness of the reality of the risks that are specific to what we do can perpetuate the problem going forward. You said that, right? To get if you encapsulate a stable asbestos coating, and then you're encapsulating your the polyurethane with a clear coat, right? So you're putting this coating over the top, so you're not encapsulating the meth, but you're actually putting it on as a preventative measure. That fundamentally changes the nature of that asset, and increases the value of the asset to the housing provider, because it's substantially reducing the risk. So the issue that we've got is that most aren't aware of the risk.
Yeah.
And so those are the sorts of things which fall into our philosophy of trying to reduce the harm caused to people by the behaviour. I guess where it takes us is potentially to reduce the harm caused by lots of other stuff, which is the day-to-day operational side of a property and of a building.
Is America using the nano coating?
So I think there are products out there that people might use in, let's say, the encapsulation space.
Like
so when there's been an issue, what we're suggesting is that hey, maybe there's some sense here in getting in front of it. Right? So you operate in a space where you know that you're going to have an issue. So you have choices. You can ignore it and then enable the behaviour and it will perpetuate, or you can say what we're going to do is protect the asset, which then reduces the economic impact of the behaviour when it happens,
long term,
which frees up some economic energy, which allows us to engage with people in a different way, which may allow us to reduce the behaviour itself in the first place, which is absolutely.
Well, what happens if you paint over the nano coating?
It will come off.
The paint.
So
if someone wanted to say, hey, I want to change the colour in this room.
Yeah.
Kelly wants to come home and change the colour in the room. You've been hard out in the meth pipe and Brady. So that you can't paint over the nano coating.
So you
can wash it down, but you can't paint
wash
over
it. But you can put a different layer of coating over the top. But you then got to go through a more significant surface preparation.
So for people that want to change the decor of their home, that's had a nano coating, and it would be more difficult.
It would be more difficult. Yeah. So again, it's not for everybody. Is the reality of it, and it's not. For every
as I said
situation.
before, I think it has other uses as well, which is not just methamphetamine.
So it's thinking about things differently, right? Yeah. It's shifting away from, what's the cost to get this building built, to what's the cost of getting the building built and operating it. And as you know, the cost to build is maybe 40% of the total cost, and then that operational piece can be quite significant. So then what are the things that we can do to mitigate the operational risk?
Where I see it fitting in more, we sit here and we talk about it, and I was involved early on with you with that. I see it fitting in commercially, commercial properties, commercial situations, foyers, common areas, those areas that are not probably so much plain residential where someone is emotionally involved with their house, wants to change the decor, rip it apart, do it up, whatever. I see those ones when they're built, they're built with this in mind, as we're going to protect, as you say, protect our asset moving forward.
Yeah.
And again, if we can reduce the consequences of the events happening, then as and when they occur, then that reduces.
And let's be frank, meth use is not going to go away, is it? It's here to stay, and it is getting larger.
It is.